everybody. Welcome to Table Talk, a place for honest conversations and getting to meet friends. So excited for you to get to meet this friend today. This is James Bouvier. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
It's going to be super fun, y'all. James is a longtime member at Sagemont Church. I have the blessing of knowing he and his wife Sharon and their son and his family and all of them for lots of years. And so I was very excited when I asked James to come on Table Talk, and he said yes, which is always lovely. Share a little bit. Let's do Sagemont story first, because you and Sharon have been here for a while.
Right. We joined Sagemont in 1971.
Love it.
So we've been here
a long time.
53 years.
That's awesome.
And it's actually Sagemont is it's really our whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
We came in 71. Our son was born in 72, our only son. He was dedicated, saved, and baptized at Sagemont Church. Mm-hmm. Stephen was married to Amy, our daughter-in-law, which we claim as our daughter.
Yes.
And he was dedicated, saved, baptized, married, and had two grandchildren, or he had two grandchildren for us, Riley and Grace.
Yeah.
Riley is 20, Grace is 18.
Which is wild that they're that old.
Riley and Grace were both dedicated, saved, and baptized in Sagemont Church.
Mm-hmm.
So for 53 years, an uninterrupted service in Sagemont has been really our entire life.
Yeah.
I started teaching in 1975. And this was interesting because Roy Kroll, who was the Sunday school superintendent at that time, he asked me to teach the first couples class.
Okay.
And that was strange for Baptists because up until that time,
it was always
Baptists
separate.
Did not allow boys and girls to meet together. So we had the first class of boys and girls, men and women, and I've been teaching uninterrupted since 1975, and now still teaching a class, plugged-in class, we call it.
Meets at 11:15 in room 1102.
Right, and I have always enjoyed teaching Revelation, prophecy, character stories like John and Noah and Paul, and right now we're have been teaching prophecy for some time, and the prophecy of Israel at war.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing because it's one of those prophetic areas in the Bible. It's not only interesting to read, but you can watch the news at night, and you can see the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely fascinating to watch that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting. You've been teaching all these years, but in your career, you weren't a teacher.
No, my career was an engineer.
Yeah.
I graduated from the University of Houston. I went there with Sharon. In fact, we were married in 1967.
Were y'all high school sweethearts?
We were high school sweethearts.
I love that.
I was her sweetheart first.
Okay.
It took me a while for me to see that she was my sweetheart.
Okay.
But we dated for 5 years.
Okay.
And then in June 3rd of 67, we were married, and I graduated about that same time with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. Okay. And then later earned a master's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in business administration.
Okay.
So that was the beginning of my career as an engineer. I was not a writer, and in fact, people who know engineers know that most engineers can't write.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. When you think an engineer, you don't think creative, outgoing, do it. You know, my dad was a mechanical engineer. He's amazing, wonderful man, but he's not necessarily that creative kind. So when they asked you to teach, what made you say yes?
Well, in the very beginning, I had taught a class early on when Sharon and I were dating at a church on the north side, and it was back in the days when you had a script.
Yes, like a curriculum and exactly what to say and all that.
I did that filling in for a person, and during that time, I thought, this is a little stilted for me. Mm-hmm. I think I could do something different than that. So when Roy asked me to teach this class, for a while I used the scripted material, and then I decided I seemed to have a real interest in doing a lot more than that.
Cool.
So I began to leave the script and just study the Bible on my own.
Yeah.
And For 49 years, God has given me a lesson every Sunday, sometimes not until Friday or Saturday night.
Right.
But he's given me a lesson every Sunday. He's told me what to say, what to do.
Right.
I've never had to struggle with it, and I've never used the material that came out of the Baptist Foundation. So anyway, it's a lot more interesting to me. The Bible is my favorite book to read. In fact, when I wrote this book, Nightmare in Times Square, Sharon told me, there's no way you can write that book because, for one thing, you've never read a fiction novel.
Really?
No.
Never?
No.
Still
I don't,
not?
No, I don't like them.
Okay.
I like real books.
Okay.
I read a lot of books, but they're all factual, real type accounts of things. And she said you have no background and no real interest in fiction books, so
how are you going to do
it? She said,
I
don't know why you think you can write this. So she was a positive support, but at the same time, she said, I don't see how
she was realistic, too.
How you're ever going to do this.
How's this going to happen? Yeah.
And by the way, Sharon she was my editor for both of the books.
That's awesome.
And like I said, I'm not a writer. I never wanted to write a book. I'll tell you why I did, but it was just not in my it was just not in my...
Wasn't in your plan.
Wasn't in my plan to do anything.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so fun. Some of y'all might not know, we have quite a few published authors here at Sagemont. And so over the next few weeks here on Table Talk, we're going to get to talk to some of those different authors. And James is one of those. He's written 2 books, and we're going to look at those and what they're about, but also just why. Why write a book? But you said something I wanted to circle back around to before we move on. You were talking about that you taught at a church early on. Tell me your salvation story.
Yeah, I was born in Houston. I've lived here all my life.
Like actually Houston? Because, everybody says Houston. Yes. They're like, oh, it's Friendswood, it's League City, it's...
Well, actually, I was born on the north side.
Okay.
And lived on the north side for quite a while. But several months after I was born, my father was killed in World War II.
Wow.
And he never knew me. I never knew him.
Wow.
So as a result, most of my young life, I was raised by my grandparents.
Okay.
And my mother worked to help support us.
Mm-hmm.
So they really were my mother and my father for most of my life until about 12 years old. So both my grandparents were very devout Christians and very active in the local church, and I give them all the credit for me being saved at such an early time. But later I began going to First Baptist Church downtown, if you can believe that. That was a long time ago, and it was one of the few churches downtown.
Yeah.
And it was a Sunday. I really don't remember the exact date or anything, but it was a Sunday. I was a young boy. I hadn't had a chance to do a lot of evil things, but it was one of those things that God clearly called me out, and I walked down a very long aisle. That was a big church, and had a very long aisle, and I went by myself. It was a long way down there.
Yes.
And I gave my heart to Christ and was baptized about 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And like I said, the church was very large. The baptistry was up in the second or third floor.
Right.
So, and the thing I remember about it, you remember certain things, but the thing I remember, they had a little place for your feet to go in for little kids, so that when they tipped you back, you wouldn't
flip up.
You wouldn't slip.
That's interesting.
And I remember, I've told this story to our Bible story class. They think it's pretty funny, but when you think about the things that you've done that God forgave you of, the one thing that came to mind, even as a really young kid, when I was walking I walked to school. Sharon makes fun of that, but I walked to Field Elementary School back in those days, and I walked past a little convenience store. And back then, even the grocery stores were very small. So every day not every day, but some days I would stop by there, and I loved cherries. Maraschino cherries. Still love them.
Yeah.
So I would go down the aisle where the cherries were, and I'd find the bottle of cherries, and if no one was looking, I would open the bottle, take a cherry out, eat it, and put the lid back on. And I thought, what's the harm done? I got one cherry out. So anyway, I did that for a while, and then of course after I was saved, I never did it again.
That is so funny.
But I'll have to say, after I was saved, I was not a model citizen.
Sure.
There were lots of things that in high school that I did I should not have done. But the thing I remember is even some of the people that I knew that I really should not have known. If I had not been saved, I would probably have been in a lot of trouble.
Sure. Yep.
And the fact that I was saved, that Holy Spirit within you, even though you resist it, said, you're doing the wrong thing. You're going the wrong way, and pull me away. And of course, when I met Sharon, she's the girl that really changed my life and set my compass in the right right direction.
That's awesome.
So she's been the sweetest thing for 57 years now. So anyway, that was kind of my beginning story and my salvation experience.
That's great. I love it so much.
And it's been great ever since.
Yeah.
So never looked back.
So you were in the engineering field, have done all kinds of different business and things in your career. You've done lots of different things.
When I graduated, I worked for NASA, and I worked during the moon landing.
Cool.
And did a lot of things. In those days, young people, just a kid out of school, they let you do things that today would never happen.
Yeah.
So I had the advantage of doing and seeing, working with the astronauts, did a lot of things that I thought I would never have the opportunity to do. And then later when I worked for HLMP, that's what brought me to this first book.
Really?
Yeah, because I worked for them, overall for 30 years, but in the early days, we were working with a lot of contractors. One of them had an office in the World Trade Center.
Okay.
In fact, it had several offices between the 84th and the 87th floor of the South Tower.
Okay.
As a result, some of the projects I worked on, I went to New York a lot, and I had an office on the 86th floor of the South Tower. Have you ever been to the World Trade Center?
Well, now I have. Not when the buildings were there, but the memorial and stuff.
Well, it's an amazing building. Just to add a little to this, on the 110th floor is the World Trade Center restaurant, Windows of the World. And the building actually sways in the wind. In fact, on my floor, the door to my office would open and close by itself. And it's a little eerie until you get used to it.
Right.
And even the elevator, the large kind of a cattle car elevator, and it went nonstop to from the first floor to about the I think the 57th floor.
Wow.
And it went so fast, if the wind was blowing, the elevator would actually sort of sway back and forth and sometimes bump the wall. And it was always very crowded, so it was a little eerie too.
Yeah.
So I never really liked working in that building.
Yeah.
It was just kind of a scary place to work. But nevertheless, I went there a lot, and spent a lot of time in New York. It kind of became my second home. And then even over the years, as my job changed, I still continued to go to the New York, and that's what brought me to the World Trade Center on the Friday before the 9/11 attack.
Wow.
So it was on that particular day, I was across the street in an attorney's office. We were actually doing a project to buy power plants in the New York, Con Edison area. It was a really fun, interesting project, but we had a lot of trouble, and I decided it'd be better to take our team home and work in Houston for a few days, so I did that. So we left, and the plan was to come back on Tuesday morning. And of course, Tuesday morning was 9/11.
Right.
So we back in Houston, we worked over the weekend. Still had problems with what we were doing. So I said, why don't we just finish what we're doing in Houston? It'd be better than to make the trip back. So as a result, on Tuesday morning, when the first plane hit, we were in our offices and actually watched the whole thing on television like everybody else did. And of course, it was very personal.
Sure. Yeah. You knew people.
Well, we had a lot of a lot of friends that worked in the tower. There was this one guy. I felt really bad for him. He was actually working on a project I was working on, and I found out later that he was on the 86th floor. One of the planes hit between about the 84th and 87th floor, and he actually was out of the tower. They thought it was just a fire in the north tower, so he actually left and evacuated with a lot of other people.
Right.
And he realized that, you remember floppy disk? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the floppy disk back in those days held all of our data, and he realized that the disk that had the project he was working on, he left it on his desk. So he went back to get it, and when he went back to get it, that's when the plane.
Oh my gosh.
Plane hit. So it was a very sad day for a lot of people.
Yeah. How long did it take you to go back to New York?
Well, actually, if you remember, the aircraft quit flying. I mean, they grounded all aircraft, and planes did not fly for quite a while. But we still had work to do. So in about 2-3 weeks, we went back to New York.
Wow.
And of course, I spent some time going over to the World Trade Center destruction area, just to look at it.
Yeah.
But went on to work, and we finished the project that we were working on. And one night we were flying back, and have you ever had God speak to you in an audible voice?
Audible, no.
Neither have I. I always thought that would be cool.
It would be really cool. I think a lot of us would love that.
But that's never happened. But anyway, flying home that night, I usually worked on the way home, so I was doing some work, and it's hard to explain. This has happened twice with both books, but God impressed upon my brain what He wanted me to do, and it was as clear as someone talking to me,
right.
But it was not an audible voice. I guess if He'd have done that, the people on the plane would have been
right.
a little shaken up too. At any rate, so what He said, or what He put into my mind was, this has been a terrifying experience for America. In fact, in this process of listening to Him, I was thinking, this was not an accident. If you think about it, it was an impossible set of circumstances.
Yeah.
It was an impossible set of odds of success. There were 19 terrorists from 4 different countries. And, of course, later it came out, we taught them to fly at a flight school in Florida, several of them anyway. And there were no red flags when the terrorists said, we don't need to know how to land the plane.
Right.
We just need to know how to fly them. So they learned how to fly. They came through 3 major airports, Washington, Dulles, Boston, Massachusetts, and Newark, New Jersey, with box cutters. Nobody stopped them. Nobody looked at them funny. Nobody checked them. So they all made it through successfully. They hijacked 4 planes, United and American, successfully, and flew 3 of them into their targets.
Right.
The World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And only the one flight, of course, was diverted to Pennsylvania because of a very brave crew of people.
Yeah.
So with all of that, and recognizing that almost 3,000 people died that day, and one thing God impressed upon me is many of those people died instantly. There was no time for them to think about eternity.
Yeah.
There was no time for them to think about anything. And even many of the people who died with just unconscionable injuries, and they had no time to think.
Right.
I mean, they were worried about their life. So the fact was, he said, I want you to write a book. I want you to use 9/11 as sort of the centerpiece for it. And I want you to explain to people, number one, life is fragile. And we act like we'll live forever.
Yeah.
And you need to explain that based on this tragedy, and there's so many others, that there are things you need to do while you can think clearly. So I want you to write a book, use 9/11 as a centerpiece, and I want you to give them some information about the Bible. I want it to be Bible-based, factual. I want you to use Scripture, and I want you to give them a clear definition of what end times are like. You know, most people, maybe not most people really don't have a good understanding of the language that the Bible uses for end times, things like the rapture and the tribulation. But there's one word they know, and that's Armageddon. And why do they know that? Because there's been so many books and movies made, and although they're not biblically factual,
Right.
they all depict in one way or another the end of the world. Although by the time the movie is over, the book is over, the world is saved.
Right.
Somehow. So people get a skewed idea of what Armageddon is about, although they know the word. And if you produce a movie that's called Armageddon, people will flock to it. It's become kind of a mysterious word that draws people. So God said you should use that word in the book. So I named the book Escaping Armageddon, and based on the cover it says, it will reveal the secret for you to escape Armageddon. So you do not have to go through the tribulation.
Yeah.
Now, that's the way the book started. And I'll have to say that at first I kind of resisted because, like I said,
you're not had you ever written before?
Well, I've written a lot of contracts.
Sure.
But contracts are not like books.
No.
And the language is different.
Even Bible study lessons are very different than writing a book.
And I don't write those.
Yeah.
I don't really write a Bible study lesson.
Okay.
I write notes. But
right, exactly.
But writing engineering material, I mean, if you get a word wrong, a tense wrong, nobody really cares.
Right.
You know, it's the fact of the document that's important. So anyway, it was a difficult decision for me. But I thought even that night, I said, okay, I'll try to begin to write some notes or an outline or something about what I can do. But that book was not published until 2011.
Oh, wow.
I was still working. So, I mean, it literally took me years to write what he wanted me to write. There's more than 250 scriptures that are referenced in the book. So every one had to be carefully annotated and checked and to be sure I had them in the right place. There were many references in the book which I could not use unless I got permission from people or organizations or companies to do. So I had to write every single one of them.
Wow.
And ask them for permission. Some I had to pay, not a lot, but I had to pay. And it just took an inordinate amount of time to get all of that done. And then a lot of it was personal travels that we had, and so it took a long time to kind of weave it all together into something that made sense. And if Sharon was here, she would tell you how many, probably hundreds of times, that I would bring something to her and say, look, okay, I wrote this, what do you think?
Yeah.
And most of the time, all she would say is, go back to the computer. It was frustrating, but it was this idea that I'm not a writer. And, well, Sharon's not a writer either, but she's a teacher.
Right.
And so she knows how to do those things. So over and over and over, I would bring her these things, and she'd say, I think you just need to go back and rewrite it. And even once I finished the book and tried to find somebody to publish it, that was difficult because if you're not, if you're not somebody of some notoriety, no one's going to publish it.
Right.
If you're not a television person, no one's going to publish it.
Right.
if you're not in politics, they're not going to publish it. So finally went to one of these many places where you can, publish it yourself, which is what I did. And that turned out to be a good experience, although there was more rewriting.
Okay, because then they're reading it.
They're reading
and
it.
giving you notes back and all that. Okay.
Yeah, and then I gave it to friends of mine, copies of the draft, and I said, what do you think? And some said okay, some said good, and some said, well, this part right here, I don't really understand.
Yeah.
It. So I rewrote it again. So there was literally hundreds and hundreds of rewrites,
right.
And then I didn't get all the permissions to put everything in for a long time. So
sure.
that
took time.
That took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I was trying to write the book where people would find it interesting to read, easy to understand, even though it was Bible-based. It didn't come across as a religious book. Mm-hmm. So people, when they started reading it, wouldn't think, I'm reading the Bible or
right.
something. In fact, the scriptures were written in a way that you didn't really notice they were even scriptures out of the Bible. Mm-hmm. They were just part of it. The text. Mm-hmm. And as a result, that all just made it take longer and longer to write the book.
Yeah.
Finally, I was done, and I gave it to a few people, and they kind of gave me the okay
right.
that it's good. And I had a lot of help from a lot of different people, including our family. Mm-hmm. I had Amy and Stephen read the book. Of course, at that time, Riley and Grace were small, right. So they didn't take part in that. And so finally the book was published in 2011. And Brother John actually read the book and endorsed the book from the pulpit, which I thought was a really strange thing.
Yeah.
Normally, pastors don't, endorse anything, mm-hmm. Especially from the pulpit. But nevertheless, he did. And I remember the one thing he said that really just, I thought that's what it's all about. He said, when I read that book and I finished it, he said, if I had not been saved, I would be. Mm. I thought, well, that
awesome.
was the purpose of the book.
Yeah.
That's why
right.
God had me write it.
The secret to surviving the end of the world.
Right.
Which is what it says. I said that. I love this. It says, learn the secret of surviving the end of the world.
Right.
It's a really neat
And it's
concept.
not a secret, but to most people it is.
To very, very many it is. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So you wrote this one, went through all of that.
Right.
And then decided to do it again. In a very different way.
Not for a while.
Yeah.
Not for a while. In fact, both books are very different.
Yes.
But they have a common thread that runs through them of trying to introduce people to Jesus in a very informal mm-hmm. way, non-religious way, and yet introduce them to Jesus and even the plan of salvation, and hope that by the time they read either book, they'd realize they're not saved, right. and they would be. But the two books are very different. Yeah. And I didn't write anything for a long time.
Right.
I mean, I wrote this. I thought, that's good. I'm done. Mm-hmm. I went to a lot of churches and presented the book, and it was well received by a lot of people. Mm-hmm. We sold thousands of copies of it. And the one thing I think, the other thing God impressed upon me, they said, when you sell this book and you get thousands of dollars for it, that money needs to go to the same place that you wrote the book for, and that is some place that people will be saved. Mm-hmm. So I gave it to Sagemont Missions.
Cool.
So all the money went to the
yeah.
missions group
That's
here
awesome.
at Sagemont. So
I love that.
They were happy to get that, and I was
sure.
happy to give it
That's
to them.
That's amazing.
So I've never kept a dollar from either one of these two.
Yeah. That's a
yeah.
beautiful thing. I love that. So talk about how did this one, because when I asked you, this is the one I remembered. You can tell I'm a fiction girl more than not. But this one is so very different than this one.
It's almost opposite from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how did Nightmare in Times Square, fiction book. You've never read a fiction book.
Not that I know of.
But he wrote one. How did that happen? Where'd that idea come from?
Well, it was a long time after the first book. And, of course, like I said, I practically lived in New York. That was like my second home. Very familiar with New York and Times Square. Mm-hmm. Sharon and I have been there many, many times. I've taken her a lot, and she enjoyed it up until after the virus when things begin to change.
Yeah.
But anyway, Times Square, New York, that's all sort of in my head, my heart. And this was another one of those cases where I never hardly ever dream. You can ask Sharon. I have probably 2 dreams a year.
Right.
Sharon dreams every night.
Wow. Okay.
So we're very different.
Yeah.
Anyway, I woke up in the night. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not, but I had the same impression on my mind that I did when I wrote the first book. And God was clearly speaking to me. And he said, okay, the first book was good, but I have another job for you. The people need another tool for salvation, one that they would be interested in reading a book that provides excitement for them and fun for them, and definitely not religious. Nothing to do with religion. But somehow I want you to introduce Jesus to them in that book and the plan of salvation so that you get the same results you did from the first book. Well, in this brief, probably it was actually just very short time, but it seemed like a long time that he was speaking to me. He gave me a name for the book. He gave me the characters for the book. And he gave me the whole storyline for the book. I really didn't have to come up with this book.
Yeah.
In fact, I can clearly say, except for writing, I had nothing to do with the idea for the book.
Right.
So he gave me everything I needed to write it. All I had to do was fill in the blanks. I woke up in the night, and I went right then and wrote down what he'd given me. And then I spent the next 4 years, I guess, filling in the blanks. I really didn't want to do this. I was very tired from this. Sharon was tired from this. And she was going to have to edit it again.
Right.
But I thought, well, this may be different because it will be a little more fun to write, a little more imaginative,
Right.
a little more creative to write. And one thing about it, it was going to contain up-to-date, actual current events in the world. So God wanted me to tie this to what's happening in the world. And of course, back then it was not unlike today with Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and all the things that were happening overseas. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, maybe it won't be too bad, since I had an outline for it. So the first thing I decided is most of the characters, I'm going to make them my family. So you can't really tell by reading the book, but Amy and Stephen are in there. Riley and Grace are in there. Sharon's even in there. I'm not in there. Even Harlow the dog is in there.
Fun.
So that made it sort of fun for me to write. But then I thought, well, it's a mystery book. It needs to be fun for the whole family to read, and not necessarily defined by an age group. So it's written in a way that almost any age person can read the book and enjoy it. And of course, clean as a pen.
Yeah.
And the theme of the Bible and Jesus and salvation runs through it almost from the beginning, but you just don't notice it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably not even clear to most people until 25 chapters into the book.
Right.
And then hopefully by then, people are still reading it, even though they may not be a Christian.
Right.
So anyway, it starts out with a character, Jonathan Whitfield, who is sort of my version of who was the guy in the tomb story,
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay. Yeah.
Who was that guy?
Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford.
I don't remember his name in the actual movies, but yes.
Yeah, he was sort of my character for him.
Jones.
Yeah,
Jones.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones. There you go.
Right, and then you need a heroine. You need a girl. So I had a girl, very attractive young girl who was a linguist. She was a interpreter for the United Nations. And she was well-versed in several languages, and one of them was Farsi, which is the language of Iran, which turned out to be very important in the book. And Jonathan was a world-renowned archaeologist and a professor in a university in Princeton. So the story it starts in Times Square, but it actually takes place in Princeton, New Jersey, Israel, where we've spent a good deal of time, and Iran and Iraq. And basically, Jonathan and Grace, which was his assistant, were busy working on a sort of a normal dig in Iraq, in the ruins of Babylon. And they discovered an ancient manuscript, 2,000 years old, which was an amazing find for them. But this manuscript had a lot of loose ends, a lot of mysterious items in it.
Right.
And it led them to a extremely mysterious artifact that seemed to have the secret that threatened the end of the world. So this led them on a journey around the world. There's danger on every page. It's a little love story that sort of runs throughout the book. And the fact that they both were involved in the search for this mysterious artifact, which in fact centers around a story in the book of Judges in the Bible, the Rock of Ebenezer. And that turns out to be important all the way to the end of the book.
That's awesome.
And then, along with everything else, there was a warning. God gave a warning to America, which I believe the 9/11 story was a warning, and not just an accident or a coincidence. And the warning was, if you'll do what I tell you, no one will be harmed, but you'll know I'm God, and you'll know the Bible is true.
Right.
You'll have to read the book to see
Yes.
if they actually did what God said.
I love that.
There are a lot of twists and turns in the book, and the book has a surprise ending.
That's awesome. And this one is still available on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon has that
Awesome.
book. You can buy them every day.
There you go. Nightmare in Times Square, James Bouvier.
Yeah.
And then this one is out of print.
It's out of print.
But I bet there's a lot of people running around Sagemont that have this on their bookshelf. You could ask around.
And I've probably got 100 copies of it.
Okay.
If somebody wanted one, I'd be
If you
glad
really
to-
want to grab one,
I'd be glad to give
let
them-
James know.
give them
Listen,
one. Yeah.
James, I appreciate you coming. These are such good resources, and I love that you said yes to God when He asked you to do them.
Well, so am I now that it's
Not done.
now that it's done. Yeah, and
Now
I
that
hope
it's
people
finished.
will. I really hope people will read the book, especially Nightmare in Times Square.
Yeah.
And I would say give it to your friends, especially those who are not saved.
Right. And then
And-
come back and tell James the stories.
And I would love to hear
Yeah.
the results of those stories.
Love
I
that.
appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely.
And,
Super good. I've read both of them. They're both excellent books. I highly encourage you to grab both of those. If you see James in the hallway, tell him hey. Tell him thank you for following after the Lord. And try out, if you're looking for a Connect group, try out Plugged In at 11:15 and 11:02. James and Sharon are in there. They'd love to see you. So
right, sure would.
thanks so much for
Okay,
hanging out
thank you
today.
very much.
I appreciate
Appreciate
it.
having me.
Y'all have a great rest of your day. See you next time on Table Talk.